Nathan Mercer had not always been the kind of man who arrived at the office before sunrise. There was a time, early in his 30s, when he slept until 7, ate a slow breakfast, and believed that life was meant to be tasted rather than conquered. That version of Nathan had died somewhere between his second and third billion, buried quietly beneath board meetings, acquisition deals, and the particular loneliness that came from standing at the top of something enormous with no one beside you who truly understood the view. At 38, Nathan Mercer was the founder and CEO of Mercer Capital Group, a private investment firm headquartered on the 54th floor of a glass tower in Midtown Manhattan. The firm managed assets across real estate, energy, and private equity, and Nathan's name appeared on lists that most people only read about in magazines they picked up in waiting rooms. He was handsome in the way that powerful men often are, not because of any extraordinary feature, but because confidence had a way of rearranging a man's face into something compelling. Dark hair, strong jaw, a beard kept just short enough to look deliberate. He wore his suits the way other men wore armor. But on this particular Tuesday morning in late October, none of that mattered. He had arrived at 5:47 a.m., which was unusual even for him. A call from Singapore had ended badly the night before. A deal he'd spent 4 months structuring had collapsed in a single phone conversation, and sleep had refused to come. By 4 in the morning, he had given up entirely, dressed in the dark of his penthouse apartment, and taken a car downtown, while the city was still quiet and the streets belonged to delivery trucks and insomniacs. The 54th floor was empty when he stepped off the elevator. The cleaning crew had already come and gone. The overhead lights were set to their low nighttime mode, casting everything in a cool, dim blue. Nathan moved through the reception area without turning on anything, navigating by memory and the ambient glow of Manhattan seeping through the floor-to-ceiling windows. He had walked this space 10,000 times. He knew every corner of it. What he did not know, could not have anticipated, was that his executive secretary had also come in early. Her name was Claire Donovan, and she had worked for Nathan Mercer for 14 months. She was 29 years old, with light brown hair that she usually wore pinned back, a quiet efficiency that bordered on invisibility, and a small gold necklace she touched whenever she was thinking hard about something. She had been hired by his previous assistant, Margaret, who had retired and recommended Claire with a single sentence: "She's better at this job than I ever was." Nathan had barely paid attention to the recommendation at the time. He had simply inherited Claire the way a man inherits furniture, without ceremony, without question. She managed his calendar, filtered his calls, coordinated travel, prepared briefing documents, and maintained a composure so steady that Nathan had come to regard her the way he regarded reliable infrastructure. She was simply there, functioning, necessary, invisible. He had never thought about her as a person, not really, not in the way that mattered. He was moving toward his office when he noticed the light under the door of the small executive washroom adjacent to the conference suite, a private bathroom reserved for senior staff during events, largely unused on ordinary days. The door was slightly ajar, not fully closed, and a warm strip of light fell across the carpet. Nathan almost kept walking. Later, he would not be able to explain exactly why he stopped. Perhaps it was the stillness of the floor, the way a small thing becomes amplified in silence. Perhaps it was simply that his mind, stripped of its usual momentum by exhaustion and the wreckage of last night's call, noticed what it would have otherwise ignored. He stopped 2 steps past the door. Through the gap, narrow, no more than 3 inches, he saw Claire. She was changing out of workout clothes, her back partially turned, pulling a cream-colored blouse over her head. He saw the line of her spine, the curve of her shoulder, the small tattoo at the base of her neck that he had never noticed before. 3 tiny stars, precise and deliberate, like a constellation she'd chosen to carry. She was completely unaware of him. She moved with the quiet ease of someone who believed herself to be entirely alone. Nathan stepped back immediately. His heel caught the edge of a chair leg, and it shifted with a soft scrape, barely audible but enough. Claire spun toward the sound. Their eyes met through the gap. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence was absolute, the kind that has weight and temperature and a specific texture. Claire's face went through 3 expressions in quick succession: surprise, embarrassment, And then something controlled and careful that Nathan recognized as professionalism, closing over everything else, like a curtain being drawn. "Mr. Mercer," her voice was steady. "Remarkable, really." "I'm sorry," Nathan said immediately. "The door was open. I wasn't—" He stopped. He was not accustomed to stammering. It felt foreign in his mouth. "I'll wait in my office." He turned and walked away, his footsteps too deliberate, too careful, as if the floor might crack beneath him. He closed his office door and stood in the center of the room for a full minute without moving. Through the windows, Manhattan was beginning to lighten, a slow gray brightening at the edges of the sky, the river turning from black to pewter. He should have been thinking about Singapore, about the collapsed deal, about the 17 emails waiting in his inbox. Instead, he was thinking about those 3 stars, about the fact that after 14 months he had not known they existed. He sat down at his desk and opened his laptop, and the screen's light fell across his face, and he stared at it without reading anything. A strange feeling had settled in his chest, not guilt, though there was some of that, not attraction, though he'd be a liar to claim he'd been entirely unaffected. It was something harder to name, something closer to the sensation he sometimes got looking down from the window of his penthouse at the city below, that vertigo of realizing how much was happening that he'd never see. How many people moved through his world, fully formed and complex and alive, while he looked straight through them. The door to his office opened at exactly 6:15. Claire stepped in, dressed now in her work clothes, hair pinned back, the small gold necklace at her throat. She carried a legal pad and a pen. Her face was composed. "Good morning, Mr. Mercer," she said, as if the previous 20 minutes had not occurred. "Your 6:30 call with the London desk has been moved to 7. Your 9 o'clock with the board has a revised agenda on your desk. And your coffee is brewing." Nathan looked at her, not through her, at her. "Claire," he said. She paused. He almost never used her first name. "I owe you an apology." Something shifted in her expression, a small, involuntary thing, quickly suppressed. "It's fine, Mr. Mercer. It was an accident." "It was," he agreed, "but that's not the only thing I'm apologizing for." She waited, not sure what was coming. "I've worked with you for over a year," Nathan said, "and I don't think I've asked you a single question that wasn't about work." The silence that followed was different from the one in the hallway. This one didn't have the sharp edge of embarrassment. It had something softer beneath it, something uncertain, like the moment before weather changes. Claire's pen moved slightly between her fingers. "I'll get your coffee," she said, and left before he could say anything else. Nathan turned back to his window. The sky was fully light now, the river silver and moving, the city waking up around him with its vast, indifferent roar. He had built an empire by understanding value, by seeing what others overlooked and recognizing its worth before the market caught up. He had made billions doing exactly that. He wondered, sitting alone on the 54th floor as the sun rose over Manhattan, whether he had been missing something far more valuable than anything traded on a balance sheet, and whether it was too late to look properly. Claire Donovan had a rule she'd made for herself on the first day of every job she'd ever held. Don't become a story. Stay useful. Stay quiet. Stay professional. Be the person who solves problems before anyone notices they exist. And never, under any circumstances, let your personal life bleed into the hours between 8 and 6. She had kept that rule perfectly for 14 months at Mercer Capital Group. And then Nathan Mercer had looked at her, truly looked at her, through a 3-inch gap in a bathroom door, and something in the careful architecture of her professional life had developed a hairline crack she couldn't stop noticing. She told herself it meant nothing as she rode the elevator down to the lobby coffee station. She told herself it again as she poured his dark roast into the heavy ceramic mug she'd learned he preferred over paper cups. And she told herself a third time as she walked back to the 54th floor, balancing the mug and her legal pad and the quiet armor of her composure. What bothered her was not the accident itself. Accidents happened. What bothered her was what he'd said afterward. "I don't think I've asked you a single question that wasn't about work." It had caught her completely off guard, not because it was untrue, but because she'd spent 14 months being perfectly fine with it. She'd preferred it that way. She had come to Mercer Capital precisely because Nathan Mercer had a reputation for being demanding and impersonal and wholly focused on results. No office politics, no blurred lines, no complications. Claire Donovan had a complicated enough life outside those glass walls. She set his coffee on his desk without a word and returned to her station. And the morning moved the way mornings always did, fast and efficient and without sentiment. Calls were routed, documents were prepared. A vendor dispute in the Chicago office was resolved with 3 emails and a firm phone call that Claire handled herself, because Nathan was back-to-back in meetings until noon. By the time the lunch hour arrived, she had almost convinced herself the morning had been nothing more than an awkward blip. Then his intercom buzzed. "Claire, come in, please." She gathered her pad and walked into his office. He was standing at the window, his default position when he was thinking through something that resisted resolution, with his jacket off and his sleeves rolled to the elbow, one hand in his pocket and the other holding his phone loosely at his side. "Sit down," he said, which was unusual. She normally stood during briefings. She sat in one of the chairs across from his desk. Nathan turned from the window. He studied her for a moment, with the same focused attention he gave to balance sheets and acquisition proposals, and Claire had the disorienting sensation of being read like a document. "Tell me something about yourself," he said. She blinked. "I'm sorry." "Something that isn't on your resume." Claire held her pen, the small gold necklace, a gift from her mother. A thin chain with a delicate disc engraved with the letter E shifted at her throat as she swallowed. "Mr. Mercer, I'm not sure this is—" "I'm not asking as your employer," he said. "I'm asking as someone who realizes he's been remarkably incurious about the person who manages most of his professional life." It was disarming, the directness of it. Nathan Mercer was known for many things: decisiveness, precision, an almost unnerving ability to read a room. But this particular variety of candor was new. Claire had studied him the way any good assistant studied a principal, carefully, from a safe distance. She knew his habits, his preferences, his moods. She knew he took his coffee without sugar and his meetings without small talk. She knew he went quiet when he was angry and clipped when he was tired. She knew he had a younger brother named Daniel, whom he spoke to rarely, and a mother in Connecticut whom he called every Sunday without fail. What she had not expected was for him to turn that same quality of attention toward her. She made a decision. "I used to paint," she said. "Watercolors, mostly. Landscapes." Nathan sat on the edge of his desk. "Used to?" "I stopped about 3 years ago." "Why?" She looked at him steadily. Life rearranged itself. He didn't push. He simply nodded in the way of a man who knew what it meant when a person chose a vague answer. It meant the real answer was true and heavy and not yet ready to be handed to a stranger. "What's the necklace?" he asked. Her hand moved to it instinctively. She noticed the gesture and stopped herself. "It was my mother's." "Was?" "She passed 4 years ago." "I'm sorry," he said. And unlike most people who said it, he didn't follow it with anything. He let the word stand alone, which was somehow more respectful than elaboration. The silence that followed was different from any silence that had existed between them before. All the previous silences had been functional, gaps between instructions and acknowledgments. This one had dimension. "The stars," Nathan said. Claire looked at him. The tattoo. 3 stars. She hadn't known he'd seen it clearly enough to remember. Something tightened in her chest. "Orion's belt," she said quietly. "My mother used to take me to the roof of our building when I was little. She'd point out the constellations. Orion was the only one I could always find." Nathan was quiet for a moment, then, "She sounds like someone worth carrying." Claire felt the words land somewhere deeper than she was prepared for. She looked down at her legal pad and drew a breath. When she looked up again, her expression was composed, but something behind it had shifted, and she suspected he could tell. "Was there something specific you needed, Mr. Mercer?" she asked, returning to the only ground she trusted. He seemed to accept the retreat. He reached for a folder on his desk. "The Callaway Group proposal. I need the executive summary restructured before the 4 o'clock." The opening section buries the numbers. I want them in the second paragraph. I'll have it to you by 3, she said, standing. Claire. She paused at the door. You can call me Nathan, at least when we're not in a meeting. She turned that over carefully. 14 months of Mr. Mercer. 14 months of precise professional distance. The distance had always been a comfort, a clear line between her world and his, 2 trains running parallel on separate tracks. Naming him differently would mean something, even if she couldn't articulate exactly what. I'll have the summary to you by 3, she said again, and left. Back at her desk, she opened the Callaway file and stared at the first paragraph without reading it. Her colleague, Marcus Hale, who handled investor relations 2 desks down, rolled his chair toward her. You okay? Marcus was 32, easy-mannered, the kind of person who noticed things without making a production of it. Fine, Claire said. He call you in for something weird? She looked at Marcus. He had a habit of reading the temperature of the floor, and today he'd clearly felt something shift. He asked me to restructure the Callaway summary, she said. Marcus raised an eyebrow. He looks at you differently today. Don't. I'm not saying anything. Good. Marcus rolled his chair back, hands up in surrender, but his expression said what his mouth had decided not to. Claire returned to the document. She restructured the opening. She tightened the language. She moved the numbers to the second paragraph and made sure the logic flowed cleanly. It was good work. She knew it was good work, and she sent it to Nathan's inbox at 2:47. His reply came at 2:52. Perfect. Thank you. 2 words. She'd received hundreds of exactly that response over 14 months. This time, somehow, it landed differently. At 3:05, Claire's cell phone buzzed with a number she hadn't seen in 7 months. She felt the air leave her lungs. She stared at the name on the screen. Ryan. Her ex-fiancé. The man she'd spent 2 years building a life with before he'd dismantled it in a single conversation on a rainy Wednesday in March. The man she had moved across the city to stop accidentally running into. The man whose absence she had rebuilt herself around carefully, the way you rebuild a wall around a missing stone. He had sent a text. We need to talk. It's important. Please, Claire. I know I don't have the right to ask, but I'm asking anyway. She set the phone face down on her desk. Across the office, through his glass-walled office, Nathan Mercer was reading the restructured summary, and even from a distance she could tell he was satisfied. There was a particular stillness he had when something met his standard. Claire picked up her pen, put it down, picked up her phone again. Whatever Ryan wanted, after 7 months of silence, could only mean one thing. Something had happened, and things that happened to Ryan she had learned the hard way, had a tendency to reach across whatever distance she'd put between them and pull her back in. She had spent 14 months building something steady inside those glass walls. She could already feel the pull of the past threatening to undo it. The text Ryan had sent sat on Claire's phone like a stone she couldn't move around. She had read it 4 times by the time 5 o'clock arrived, and each time the words rearranged themselves slightly in her mind. We need to talk. It's important. I know I don't have the right. As if she might find a version of them that didn't require a response. She didn't respond. Not yet. She locked her phone, finished the afternoon's remaining tasks with the focused precision that had always been her truest defense against feeling too much, and left the office at 5:45. The elevator doors closed behind her, and she exhaled for what felt like the first time in 2 hours. The October air outside the tower was sharp and clean, carrying the particular cold that settled over Manhattan in the weeks before November, when the city remembered it had a winter coming and began to brace itself. Claire pulled her coat tighter and walked 4 blocks to the subway, letting the rhythm of her own footsteps organize her thoughts. Ryan Callaway had not contacted her in 7 months, not since the afternoon he'd shown up at her door in February, 3 weeks after the breakup, with a speech prepared and flowers she hadn't let inside the apartment. She had stood in the doorway and listened to the first 2 sentences, and then she had said, quietly and with complete finality, "Please don't do this, Ryan." And he had nodded, and he had left, and that had been the end of it. Until now. She made herself wait until she was home, a small but carefully arranged apartment in Murray Hill where she'd hung 3 of her old watercolors above the bookshelf because her therapist had told her that surrounding yourself with evidence of who you used to be was not weakness, but navigation, before she called him back. Ryan answered on the second ring. Claire, his voice was the same. That had always been the cruelest thing about hearing from people you'd once loved. Their voices arrived unchanged, carrying all the old familiarity, while everything else had shifted beyond recognition. "What's happened?" she asked. She didn't greet him. There was no cruelty in it, simply efficiency. She had learned that with Ryan, warmth was a doorway he walked through without checking whether he'd been invited. A pause. "I need to tell you something, and I need to tell you in person." "Tell me over the phone." "I can't." "Claire, please. 1 coffee, 30 minutes. After that, I'll never contact you again if that's what you want." She closed her eyes. The watercolors on the wall, a river in autumn, a coastline she'd painted from a photograph, a meadow she'd imagined rather than seen, hung in their frames, quiet witnesses. "Tomorrow," she said, noon, the coffee place on 34th. "Thank you," Ryan said, and he sounded genuinely like a man who was relieved rather than triumphant. That was the detail that troubled her most as she hung up. The next morning, Nathan Mercer arrived at 7. He was running on better sleep, 5 hours, which for him was adequate, and the energy of the floor felt different from the day before, less raw and exhausted. He reviewed 3 investment memos before 8, called his operations lead in Houston about a pipeline asset, and found himself at 8:30 standing at Claire's desk before he'd entirely decided to go there. She looked up, professional, composed. But there was something beneath the composure this morning, a shadow of something restless, like a lake that's smooth on top but moving underneath. "You have the Callaway Group meeting at 9, she said, pulling up his schedule. "Then a working lunch with your legal team at noon. Conference room B after that." "Skip the noon," Nathan said. She looked at him. "Send my apologies to the legal team. Ask Marcus to cover the preliminary discussion. I'll review whatever comes out of it." He paused. "I'd like to have lunch with you instead." The silence that arrived was careful and specific. "Mr. Mercer." "Nathan," she held his gaze steadily. "I have an appointment at noon." Something in his expression shifted. Not wounded, not offended. Something more like recalibration. He nodded once. "Of course. Apologies for the short notice." He returned to his office. Claire watched him go, then turned back to her screen, and whatever she was feeling moved across her face too quickly for Marcus, glancing up from his desk, to catch fully. But Marcus had been watching this floor for 2 years and missed very little. He said nothing. He filed it away. The coffee shop on 34th Street was a narrow place that smelled of cinnamon and roasted beans, the kind of spot that attracted people who wanted to be in the middle of the city without feeling exposed by it. Claire arrived 3 minutes early and chose a table near the window. She ordered a tea she didn't particularly want and held the cup for warmth. Ryan arrived exactly on time. He was 31, broad-shouldered, with the kind of easy good looks that had first caught her attention in a graduate seminar 6 years ago, and the kind of easy certainty that had eventually broken something important between them. He looked tired today, worn, in the way that people look when they've been carrying something heavy long enough that the weight has started to show in their posture. He sat across from her. He did not reach for her hand. "Thank you for coming," he said. "You have 30 minutes, Claire said, not unkindly, simply true. Ryan wrapped both hands around his coffee cup. "Do you know who Nathan Mercer is?" Claire went very still. "I work for him," she said after a moment. Ryan's expression shifted, surprise followed by something that looked like genuine dread. "You work for Nathan Mercer." "I've been his executive secretary for 14 months. She kept her voice level. "Why?" Ryan set down his cup. "Claire, I need you to hear all of this before you react." He looked at her directly. "My uncle is Gerald Callaway, of the Callaway Group." She had known the name from the proposal files. A mid-size commercial real estate holding company seeking to restructure debt through a private equity partnership. Mercer Capital had been in preliminary discussions for 8 weeks. She had prepared multiple documents for it. She had never, at any point, connected Ryan to the name on that folder. "Gerald isn't just looking for a financial partner," Ryan said quietly. "He's in serious trouble. He owes money to people outside legitimate channels. Serious money, the kind that doesn't come with payment extensions." He approached Mercer Capital because he thought if the equity deal closed, the capital injection would cover what he owes and buy him enough time to restructure properly. Ryan's jaw tightened. What he didn't tell Mercer's team, what he hasn't told anyone, is that the properties backing the deal are partially encumbered. There's a lien on 2 of the 3 main assets that his lawyers buried in the paperwork. If Mercer Capital closes this deal as structured, they'll absorb debt they have no idea they're taking on. Claire stared at him. The tea had gone cold in her hands. "You're telling me your uncle is defrauding the company I work for?" "I'm telling you because I found out 2 days ago, and I didn't know what else to do." Ryan's voice cracked slightly. Not with manipulation, she recognized, but with genuine distress. "I can't go to Gerald, and I don't know Nathan Mercer, but I know you, and I thought you'd know what was right." The noise of the coffee shop continued around them, the hiss of the espresso machine, the low murmur of other conversations, the sound of the city carrying on without any awareness of what was happening at this small window table. Claire set down her cup. She thought about the Callaway Group proposal on Nathan's desk. She thought about the 9 o'clock meeting that had taken place 2 hours ago while she was riding the subway here, the meeting she had scheduled, the documents she had prepared, the deal she had unknowingly helped move forward one careful step at a time. She thought about the Singapore deal that had collapsed 2 nights ago and the exhaustion it had carved into Nathan's face when he'd appeared before sunrise on that Tuesday morning. She thought about a man who had spent 2 days looking at her differently, who had apologized, who had asked about her mother and remembered 3 small stars, and then she thought about what it would cost her to walk back into that office and say what she now knew. Ryan was watching her carefully. "Claire, I have to go," she said. She stood, reaching for her coat. Her voice was steady because she needed it to be. "You did the right thing telling me. What are you going to do?" She buttoned her coat from the bottom up, the way her mother had taught her. Practical things done in order, one at a time. "The right thing," she said. And she walked out into the cold October afternoon without looking back. Claire walked the 12 blocks back to the office without taking the subway. She needed the cold air and the noise and the resistance of the wind against her face, needed the city to push back against her so she could feel the solidity of her own forward motion. By the time she pushed through the revolving glass door of the tower lobby and stepped into the elevator, she had decided exactly what she would say and exactly how she would say it. What she had not decided was what it would cost her, because there was a version of this that ended with her out of a job. Nathan Mercer was not a man who welcomed surprises. She knew that better than almost anyone. 14 months of managing his world had taught her that he valued control above nearly everything else, and information that arrived late, especially information that exposed a vulnerability in a deal his team had been building for 8 weeks, would not be received gently. He might thank her. He might also conclude that an assistant who had, however innocently, processed documents connected to a fraudulent proposal was an assistant he could no longer trust to be objective. He was a man who operated on clean lines, and she had just become a complicated one. She stepped off the elevator at the 54th floor. Marcus looked up from his desk as she passed. She gave him nothing, not a word, not a glance, and he had the good sense not to ask. She stopped at Nathan's office door. Through the glass wall she could see him at his desk, reading something, a pen moving slowly in his right hand, the way it did when he was concentrating deeply. His jacket was draped over the back of his chair. His coffee, she noticed, had gone cold again. The steam had long since stopped rising from the mug she'd placed there 2 hours ago. She knocked twice and opened the door. He looked up. Whatever he read in her face made him set the pen down immediately. "Close the door," he said. She did. She sat without being asked, the second time in 2 days, which in the previous 14 months had happened not once. She placed her hands flat on her knees and looked at him directly. "I need to tell you something about the Callaway Group deal," she said, And before I do, I want you to know that I only found out this information an hour ago through a personal connection I had no prior knowledge was connected to that company. I have nothing to gain from telling you this, and I understand if after I do, you feel my position here is compromised." Nathan's expression had gone very still. He gave a single, slow nod. "Tell me." She told him everything. She did it in precise, sequential order. The text from Ryan the previous afternoon, the meeting this morning, everything Ryan had said about Gerald Calloway, the encumbered properties, the buried liens, the private debt that the deal's structure was being used to quietly absorb. She left nothing out, softened nothing, added no editorial framing. She delivered the facts the way she would have delivered a briefing document, cleanly, completely, without ornamentation. When she finished, Nathan was quiet for a long moment. Outside the windows, Manhattan spread in every direction under a pale October sky, the river glinting silver and distant, the other towers standing in their rows like silent witnesses to all the things that happened inside glass walls. "The lien documentation," Nathan said finally. "Would it be in the due diligence files our legal team received? If it was intentionally buried, it would be in the subsidiary disclosures, appendix materials, the kind of thing that gets reviewed last, if at all, when the primary assets look clean." Nathan picked up his phone. He called his general counsel, a sharp, methodical woman named Patricia Holt, and asked her to pull the Calloway appendix files and review all subsidiary property records before end of day. He said it without drama or explanation. Patricia, who had worked with him for 6 years, asked no questions. She simply said she'd have something within 3 hours. He put the phone down and looked at Claire. "You could have said nothing," he said. "No," she said, "I couldn't have. The connection to your personal life, to your ex-fiancé, that wasn't easy to bring in here." "It was the right thing," she said, and it was exactly what she'd told Ryan when she'd left the coffee shop, and she'd meant it then, and she meant it now, and she recognized that it might still cost her the job she had spent 14 months building into something she was genuinely proud of. "Claire," Nathan leaned forward slightly, "I want you to understand something. What you did this afternoon took more integrity than most people I've worked with, at any level, would have managed. You protected this company at personal risk to yourself. That is not something I will forget." She held his gaze. "What happens now with the deal?" "We halt it pending Patricia's review. If the liens are there, we present Gerald Calloway with the documentation and give him the choice to disclose fully and restructure honestly, or we walk. Either way, Mercer Capital doesn't absorb hidden debt." His voice was calm and absolute, the voice of a man who had built something real and knew how to defend it. "And either way, you keep your job." Something released in Claire's chest. She hadn't realized how tightly she'd been holding against the possibility of losing it until the possibility was lifted. "Thank you," she said quietly. "Don't thank me," Nathan said. "I'm the one who owes thanks." Patricia Holt's review confirmed everything by 4:30 that afternoon. The liens were there. 2 of the 3 primary properties carried encumbrances connected to a private creditor network, buried across 43 pages of subsidiary appendix, written in language sufficiently dense to require a forensic reading to catch. Had the deal closed as structured, Mercer Capital would have inherited approximately $18 million in undisclosed debt. Gerald Calloway was confronted by Nathan's legal team the following morning. Faced with the documentation, he did not deny it. He was, in the end, less a criminal than a desperate man who had convinced himself that the deal would save him before anyone noticed the fine print. Nathan gave him 48 hours to bring his own attorneys in and negotiate a restructured agreement, one that disclosed all encumbrances honestly and adjusted the valuation accordingly. Gerald took the offer. The restructured deal was smaller, but it was clean, and it was real, and it moved forward without anyone going to court. Ryan sent Claire one final text that evening. "Thank you for doing what I couldn't. I hope you know I never stopped knowing exactly who you were." She read it once, set the phone down, and didn't respond. Not out of unkindness, simply because some chapters once closed were better left to the quiet dignity of their ending. What happened between Nathan Mercer and Claire Donovan did not happen quickly. That was the part that neither of them could have scripted. and perhaps the part that made it real. There was no dramatic declaration in the days that followed, no sudden collapse of professional distance into something cinematic. What there was instead was a gradual, honest shift, the kind that happens when two people who have been looking past each other finally turn and see what was there all along. Nathan began asking her to stay after the day's last meeting, when there were things that needed thinking through, not work things or not only work things. He would set aside the briefing folders and ask her what she thought about a problem that didn't have a clean numerical answer. And she would tell him, and he would listen in the particular way he had, that made a person feel as if their words were being genuinely weighed. Claire, for her part, stopped treating every exchange as a transaction to be completed and filed. She pushed back when she disagreed. She brought him coffee without being asked. She laughed once fully and without calculation at something he said, and he looked at her afterward with an expression she'd never seen on his face before, unguarded, almost wondering, like a man who had just remembered something he hadn't known he'd forgotten. 3 weeks after the Callaway situation had been resolved, on a Friday evening in mid-November, when the office had emptied and the city outside was dark and salted with lights, Nathan stood at his window with 2 glasses of wine he'd retrieved from the small cabinet in his office that he almost never opened. He handed one to Claire, who had stayed to finish a filing review and had not left when the last colleague headed for the elevator. "I want to ask you something," he said. "All right," she said. "The watercolors. You said you stopped 3 years ago because life rearranged itself." She held her glass. The lights of the city spread below them, patient and vast. "Yes." "What would it take to start again?" She considered the question seriously. The way he'd learned she considered everything, fully, without deflection. "Time," she said. "And some reason to believe the thing I made would matter to someone." Nathan looked at her. "It would matter to me," he said, simply. Completely. Without the performance of a man trying to impress. Claire felt something inside her that had been very still for a very long time begin, carefully, to move. "Then maybe I'll start again," she said. It wasn't a love confession. It wasn't a promise of anything immediate or dramatic. But it was real. The first real thing exchanged between 2 people who had spent over a year standing close enough to see each other clearly and had, until now, always been looking somewhere else. Nathan smiled. It was the kind of smile she'd rarely seen on him, unbuilt, unhurried, with nothing behind it except what it appeared to be. She realized she wanted to see it again. Outside, Manhattan continued its enormous, indifferent life, the taxis and the bridges and the river moving in the dark, the million-lit windows of a million separate stories all running alongside each other without touching. And on the 54th floor of a glass tower in Midtown, a man who had built an empire by seeing value where others didn't looked at the woman beside him and understood, with the particular certainty of someone who has made very few mistakes he couldn't fix but this close to making one he never would have recovered from. He had almost looked straight through her. He was deeply glad he hadn't. 6 months later, Claire's first new painting hung in Nathan's office, not because he'd asked for it, but because she'd wanted to give him something that couldn't be quantified. It was a nighttime skyline in watercolor, loose and luminous, the city seen from somewhere high above the street. 3 small stars were painted in the upper corner of the sky, precise and deliberate. He never moved it. Not once. And every morning when he arrived before the rest of the world and stood at his window with the city below him and the day still forming itself into whatever it would become, he looked at those 3 stars and remembered the Tuesday morning when he'd stopped walking past something he should have seen all along. Some people spend a lifetime learning that the most extraordinary things don't announce themselves. They simply wait, quiet and patient and entirely real, for someone to finally pay attention. Nathan Mercer had paid attention, and it had changed everything.